if what we focus on increases, then the first thing we should focus on is elevating the burden that we carry with us and opening ourselves up to experience lightness and to experience presence and attention that is unburdened and unencumbered by past karma and past history.
You're listening to the Octave Leap Podcast, a coherent vision for the future of business.
Welcome back to the Octave Leap Podcast. Happy New Year to everyone. Happy 2024. This is going to be a big year. Can't tell what direction it will go. I just know it's going to be monumental. Something in the numbers. It's an 8 year if you add up the numbers. So 8 always has power, money, authority associated with it. So let's see where it goes. Maybe it also means fun. Maybe it means we're all going to be abundantly prosperous this year and just have a lot of fun and really get to do the things we want. And no one will bother us with dumb, divisive tactics. That's my hope. Here's to a year where we all get along a little bit more. We're all able to work better with other people and form collaborative bonds. Because really that is what the future is about. And in this episode, I really want to talk a little bit about where this trifecta came from. Because it isn't just something that popped up in September. And I'm not like, hey guys, I just created a new system. No, it's something that's been actually happening for a very long time. And I don't want to go way back from the beginning, but basically when I was about 19 years old, I started down you could say a spiritual path. Even before that, there was the seeds planted. I used to go to church on my own, trying to dredge out some level of wisdom. Didn't really work. But anyway, at 19, I sort of had a larger awakening thanks to a friend of mine who had been living barefoot in the rainforest on the west coast of Canada. And he came home to where I was living in the city, and he started speaking about strange things and mystical adventures. And that's what kind of perked me open. And then from there, I actually ended up in a modern day sort of mystery school at the age of 20 or 21. I was very fortunate because they had a lot of wisdom and integrity in combination. There was a lot of maturity in there. So it was exactly what I needed when I was 21 and reckless, so that I was able to basically, establish some fundamentals. Now, I still was reckless, but at least that influence helped me to a degree. It also exposed me to the difference between sort of very kind of new age trite ideas and things that actually bore substance. Because the spiritual world has a lot of glamour in it, especially now, especially since spiritual Instagram has really become a thing. Literally, there's this ad of this woman, how I can become a spiritual influencer in 30 days. And it's just cultural appropriation and Burning Man adorned her. And it's just literally look how easy it is to regurgitate some wisdom and get a whole bunch of people following you to make money. And that's become sort of the modern day marketplace. There was a different version of this in the past. Anyway, that's not what this is about. This is about coming into the intelligence of the heart, the aliveness that exists within each of us, and really seizing that ability to become conscious participants in the divine process of evolution. Because life needs conscious servants for where we're going. And by serving, life shows up to give us a couple perks along the way. And I've learned over the years through this process that I came across some pretty in-depth stuff, especially when I studied the works of certain Indian yogis, but really G.I. Gurdjieff was the guy who I learned a lot from. Now, Gurdjieff intentionally made his intellectual stuff difficult to understand because he didn't want people to intellectualize the teaching. He realized that it is a bodily-led process that actually helps us make the transition between the lower three centers and into the higher three centers. And then even beyond that, from the higher three centers, right back into, coming into unity with the source. And a lot of these teachings then, they kind of sat with me in this way that was sort of angular and a bit sort of directional compared to the way that my life was unfolding and what was actually needed. But over the years and even decades, you could say at this point, I began to integrate these. And then I began to see parallels in the tarot, in alchemy, in astrology. And so I got more into that, and I launched something called the Blade and Chalice 7 years ago. And that sort of ran its natural course, because this isn't really about bringing back old things from mystery schools and stuff like that. This is really about how do we shed all of our conditioning, listen to our heart, plug in to where the future is heading, and be this conduit for this new world that's being born. And so hence why I changed everything to Octave Leap, because that's what it is. It's a frequency leap from being in the shadow bandwidth of the old system and leaping into this incredible new reality of freedom that's unfolding before us. The age of Aquarius is the age of great individuation and innovation and a divine brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity. And so that energy is what's coming in now and is fueling a lot of the technological advances, but also the humanitarian advances that we're making. And of course, in this process, the old fear-based institutions are doubling down and getting louder because they're going obsolete very fast. And so they're trying out new tricks and they're trying to imitate. That's what they've always done, is they've imitated. They've basically usurped, imitated, made it seem like the thing. You know, for instance, a lot of people would say something like Freemasonry is evil. The Freemasons are bad guys. Well, Freemasonry, if you know the story of Freemasonry, and I do because my uncle was he's very high up in Freemasonry. He can only tell me certain things, but I did my own research. Basically, when the flood waters receded, what was that? It was like 9600 BC, so close to like 11,000 years ago. Basically, there was two pillars left behind that had encoded on them, a pillar of wood and a pillar of stone. And they were called Jachin and Boaz, and they represented the divine masculine principles and the divine feminine principles. And they had encoded all of the wisdom and secrets of sacred geometry and building from the past era. And that's really, I'm assuming this was left behind somewhere in Egypt or the Middle East, because that's where we really saw the birthing of high wisdom technology at the most ancient point in history. But Freemasonry was really dedicated towards carrying that thread from the past era through to this one. Now, it wasn't called Freemasonry until the 18th century. It was called something else, but that wisdom was carried through, and it was carried through in the architects of ancient Egypt, through to ancient Greece, through to the Knights Templar, through to the actual Scottish Rites Freemasonry. And then what happened along the way is it got usurped, twisted, either made ineffective for most of the people joining. It just basically becomes an institution that perpetuates the existence of the institution, or it becomes something which has, you could say darker intentions. And that's evidenced in such rites as the Skull and Bones Society out of Yale University, for instance. And that's one that's more surface level. Bohemian Grove is another one. So you can see that what started out as a pure of intent system eventually got usurped, imitated, and turned into something else. And that's kind of like what's happening right now in the world, is that we see this green movement and we see these social justice movements and gender expression. And it's like, yeah, these things, we shouldn't marginalize anyone in the world. We shouldn't have hierarchies in society. And that is a rightful tenet of the incoming Aquarian age, is that we're all on equal footing with our own gifts and our own talents. But this thing is usurping it and using it to censor people and using it to shut down and dismiss anything that doesn't agree with a preconceived narrative. And so as a result of that, it's sort of like we're being beaten over the head with what seems like a good intention. And it's used in all the wrong ways, such as carbon taxing. Because it benefits a few. And it's the last-ditch effort of a small group of people to stay in power. And all we have to do to overcome that is to step into our own individuation. Step out of that. Stop fighting with that even. When we start to wake up, the early stages of waking up are rejecting and fighting against the very thing that kept us asleep. So what you'll see a lot of the time is that when people start to wake up and they start to get out of the shadow of the mass consciousness of humanity, they either become conspiracy theorists or social justice warriors. And so, they start getting angry and blaming the system for what it is. At a certain point, you start just like, the system's there, it's playing its tricks, but it just doesn't have any effect on you anymore. Because the system, basically what it does and what it wants you to do is it wants you to feed it. In fact, it wants to feed off of you with your anger and your fear, your outrage and your terror. And it does that by suggesting things that are outlandish, whether it's in movies, whether it's in current events, whether it's in geopolitical conflicts. It doesn't really matter. It makes these suggestions, and then we feed it with our fear and our outrage and our anger and our opinions and all of that, and it makes the thing more real. A lot of the things that we see in movies, predictive programming, are ideas or suggestions of a reality that might come to pass if enough people were to feed it. It's kind of like we bid on it. We want to collectively bid on this reality. Do we collectively want to bid on Squid Games being something that's real? Same with conspiracy theorists. To be honest, a lot of conspiracy theories are wrapped up in fear as well. And they're trying to get you to buy into that fear of, a terrible cabal coming after you and your children. And if you want, you can give that reality some energy, and then you might start finding evidence of certain things that lead you down that path, but it doesn't sound like a very fun place to exist. It doesn't sound like a very nurturing and fulfilling place to exist, and it certainly doesn't serve us actually moving towards a positive future. Yes, there's terrible things happening. There's war. There's children being abused. And I'm not negating any of that. And at the same time, I'm not going digging for tunnels, if you know what I mean. Because it's feeding a reality, and it actually creates more of that. What you focus on increases. So, this back to trifecta and how that fits on. If what we focus on increases, then the first thing we should focus on is elevating the burden that we carry with us and opening ourselves up to experience lightness and to experience presence and attention that is unburdened and unencumbered by past karma and past history. So many of us operate in a way where we're a lot of the time unconsciously burdened by our forebears. 98% of junk DNA is ancestral memories that haven't been processed, the ancestral shadow that we carry within our genes. And not just our ancestry, but different species that came before us. Therefore, we're all carrying this in one form or another. And when we find the one piece of that is the weakest link, the linchpin, and we harmonize or rebalance the relationship to it, that sets off a chain reaction that creates a lot more harmony and stability in our lives. It clears up a lot of the noise and distraction, and it minimizes a lot of the negative outcomes that we're experiencing. That's what I call healing the core wound. So that's the first step of trifecta. And I'm just very glad that I've actually found a way to identify what this is. And it's using the true sidereal zodiac, along with the gene keys, human design, astrology, and the I Ching. I'm not going to get into detail on that because it's kind of like describing a car motor. Now, if you're a practitioner of that, I'd gladly tell you that, but I know my audience is wide and varied. So it's kind of like, if you go out and buy a car, you don't really care about the spark plug and the engine unless you're a car person. You just want something that drives and is safe and comfortable. And, there's other features that you're looking for. So the features here are, this is a very easy way to show you what was the initial wound that imprinted on your soul that caused the chain reaction of other things to form. I like getting in at the meta or the fundamental layer, which is what drew me to energy work in the first place, working with the quantum field, where it all began. When you deal with where it all began, you're no longer just addressing symptoms, you're addressing a root cause. When you address a root cause, it often happens that the symptoms take care of themselves. A lot of the time, whether it be in medicine, whether it be in, emotional healing or mental healing, when we're chasing symptoms, we will basically remedy one symptom to find that there's two other ones that get unmasked that are living behind it. And then those two lead to four and so forth. So then it becomes walking through a dense jungle, and we can end up on a healing loop trying to rebalance the whole thing versus identifying what that core is. And it's important to linguistically identify what it is in your own words, because we live in a semantic reality where words actually shape the experience we have. It also activates the left hemisphere of the brain. And then we give it space. And then we give it non-judgmental awareness and presence, which brings the right hemisphere of the brain into the picture. And the left hemisphere in the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain, when we do this at the same time, simultaneously, they start to come into harmonic resonance or hemispheric resonance, activating the corpus callosum, stimulating the pineal gland, connecting with the neural intelligence, yes, neural intelligence that lives in the heart, and we're existing in a coherent state. When we're in a coherent state, we send a very powerful signal out to the universe for whatever we want to do. And so you can see, if you use a coherent state to first unmask and sort through and rebalance that core wound, you're not going to have unmet desires and needs and unhealed traumas popping up and getting in the way of what you're creating when you're in a coherent field, because that could easily cause problems. It's like giving voltage to a toddler. There's certain things I'd never place in my daughter's hands because she's too young to know what to do with them. So we don't want to give our unmet desires voltage. We want to make sure we're in a harmonious state of being first. What we do with that, when we have that clarity, when we have that freed up bandwidth, then we can hook into the ideal reality that we want to live in. Our consciousness can go there in an instant. It's the 3D reality that takes time to merge. There's a time gap because it's a slower plane of existence. There's more laws. There's the law of time and space that are operating in the 3D. Consciousness exists outside of time and space. It can hook into that ideal reality for us. And the more that we stay hooked in with our consciousness and begin to act, make decisions, and operate from that awareness, we're beginning to increase the coupling factor, the synchronization between that ideal reality and the one that we're currently existing in. What begins to happen is they begin to merge together. This reality that you're currently experiencing begins to become the ideal reality. And what I call the ideal reality is the reality that is most fulfilling for us, that gives us the greatest state of unity and connection, fulfillment, our best, relationships, our best connection and relationship with the transcendental qualities of life, the divine, whatever you want to call it, and also places us in creating a unique, positive impact in the world. And for some people, that's on a larger scale, and for others, it's on a very hidden scale. I don't want to say larger. One's more visible, one's more invisible. Both are needed. When I was in the first mystery school, the guy a few steps back in the lineage was a reclusive yogi who lived in India, and he didn't want to be found. And they said that somewhere in his, mystic intoxication. He was holding the whole fabric of reality together, keeping wars at bay, keeping conflicts at bay, and that kind of thing. There is a role for that. And some people have that. They might just be gardening. They might just be playing with kids. They might just be doing whatever they want. But the frequency they carry is stabilizing to the planet itself. And it's not a highly visible one. It's not one that as a society we give great merit towards, but it is essential on an energetic level. So whatever that reality is, though, it should feed us deeply, and we should feel a great communion with the unfolding evolution of life. When we hook into that reality, too, and we start that merging process, it begins to purify naturally the areas where we're compartmentalizing and holding on to all sorts of gunk, all sorts of constriction and contraction in the body begin to loosen. So do expect there is a little bit of a cleanup time. However, it's not as confusing. It's not something to get distracted by like it is when we're dealing with symptoms in our healing journey and we're going from here to here to here. Then we don't know what the heck, how it all fits together. So it's important that we stay focused on that ideal reality and we just let whatever needs to be purified out get purified out. Because the third step of Trifecta in this process is basically our natural relationship with prosperity. We don't need to hustle and grind. We don't need to take some exhausting strategy and turn it into our lives to make money. Because a lot of the time, there's other ways we can get the resources we need to make that dream come alive. Because, as Paulo Coelho said, the universe conspires in our favor. And so if we're sending out such a strong signal as, I've got a great relationship with my core wound, and I'm plugged into the ideal reality that serves both you and I'm ready to go. Then the universe says, okay, what do you need? And that's when we can continue sending the signal saying, I need this, this, this. And it even gives us stuff that we don't know we need too, but turns out we need it. And hindsight is always 20/20. So with that, these three steps, healing and forming a healthy relationship with our core wound, unveiling our ideal reality, and naturally attracting prosperity. That's why it's called Trifecta. Initially, I called it that because it was based on evolutionary astrology, human design, and the gene keys. However, I just see that there's three, the number three, the trinity, the balance coming in at each level. It's just there. And that's something that I've believed in for a long time. The reason I believed in it is because the third step, there's if you could put it in stages, I'd say stage one is being dominated by the masculine shadow of society, where most people are. The next stage after that is sort of new age spirituality or feminine-based spirituality, which swings the pendulum all the way over to the other side, and it becomes all about the right brain. And it's like literally the left brain becomes the enemy at that point. Because guess what? Stage one was all about the left brain and the mind. Stage two is all about the heart and the right brain. Well, stage three is about hemispheric resonance or the balance between the two, because that's where real power happens from. That's where we actually form a coherent state of being and living. And so Trifecta seems perfectly symbolized by this number. And it also goes into three core wounding placements. So there's three placements from the system, Chiron, personality Chiron, design Moon, design Mars, depict the core wounding. And then there's one for your life path. I'm still tweaking that one a bit. I'm almost there. And then the third one for prosperity, I'll just tell you guys right now, I'll let the cat out of the bag. It's your personality Jupiter, your personality Venus, and your design Mercury. Those give you the prosperity. So there's three placements that form each of the three pillars for a system that uses the three parts of the brain to bring about coherence. It's not just about the brain. This is not a mentally dominated system, but brain balancing is very important for getting past that pesky gatekeeper of the mind. When our brain on a measurable neurological level is synchronized in harmony, it's because we're operating out of our heart space and with the needs of the body. So yes, a lot of research has gone into this. And interestingly enough, that's sort of where the Blade and Chalice finished, when I realized that there was a correlation between all these three systems. And that was the birthing of Octave Leap. Now, of course, if you followed me for a while, over the last year and a half, I made a detour into business and doing business consulting and working for some large wellness brands. And I had a lot of fun with that. It was really busy, and I'm glad I did it, extremely glad I did it, gained some great stuff. But it took up a lot of my time and energy when I realized that prosperity is a much more simple endeavor. And so what I got out of that was the key for unlocking prosperity in a very natural way. And what I discovered was that when we're operating with a natural sense of prosperity, this much effort leads to this result, versus a lot of the time when we're applying various strategies and business approaches, this much effort leads to this much result. And it is this process of taking longer, trying harder, being repetitive, that tends to wear most people out. It only works for people who can, fit themselves into whatever shape hole that is. At the end of the day, I do have big visions. I have a very, very big vision for what's going to happen. And so for me, the resources to fulfill that vision are naturally going to be larger than somebody whose vision is much more about caring and nurturing and sort of living more reclusively and more as a mystic. Not to say that there isn't very visible mystics, but I know a lot of people who just want clean water, nature, a nice home somewhere, and good people around them, and they want to grow a garden, and they want to basically walk around barefoot, and that is their nectar, that is their dharma, that is their way of service, and that is a beautiful path. However, it's not fully mine. My path involves rolling my sleeves up a little bit more and actually building things and creating things in alignment with that. The real vision I see here is Trifecta growing into something called total coherence. Total coherence being a retreat-like sanctuary where we actually have a lot of these regenerative technologies and this coherent way of living established. And that there is not just people that are coming there temporarily, but people that live there permanently as well, supporting this. And you can see that this model can be replicated in many different places around the world based on the specific cultural and climate needs of different places. And where I got this from, I've had a very interesting life. At the age of 22, I got a very clear vision about building communities of the future. At 24, I was three ferries away from Vancouver. So Vancouver Island, then I took 2 ferries from there to get to a little mystical island called Cortes Island. And I was at a retreat at somewhere called Hollyhock. And Hollyhock turns out to be quite a high-profile place in certain circles. And when I was there was also a meeting of ex-CIA psychics, thought leaders, scientists, philanthropists trying to envision the best case for the world in the year 2050. And where they all converged and agreed on was a world where we lived in settlements of no more than 500 to 1,000 people. They're spread across the landscape in these self-sufficient regenerative communities that would act as sort of nodes in a larger mesh. So they were interconnected with all the other communities. The cities were still there, but they weren't as densely populated, and they weren't overrun and crowded with toxicity. They were regenerative cities. So there was a lot more green space. There was a lot more space in general and a much lower population density that allowed them to act as, hubs. And so you have these hubs, and then you have these smaller nodes of communities spread across the landscape. And that landed with me. And the other thing I saw with that too is that for us to fully function and thrive in this setting, we have to come into a state of coherence, first within ourselves and then with the planet at large. That's the only way that we can be operating that seamlessly and that cooperatively without any of the competitive and tribal qualities that have typically plagued humanity for millennia. Because let's face it, when the shadow's at play, we tend to operate out of fear and anger, which causes us to divide ourselves. You could say there's maybe certain forces that stir the pot a bit, but ultimately it comes down to us and the responsibility we're taking in our lives. So Trifecta essentially is a process of getting people from the last dregs of their shadow into alignment with where they're supposed to be, so that at a later stage, they can plug in into more coherent and regenerative communities, however they show up in the world. And I'm also not saying that, they have to show up a certain way. There's a vision that I'm plugged into that I'm moving in a certain direction with, but I'm going to let life surprise me. I'm going to let it unfold as it needs to. I'm just playing my part and staying plugged into that. And so when I ask myself, do I want to overwork tonight and push it? It's like, would I do that living in this coherent vision of mine? No, of course not. I'm going to go to bed early. So it helps me with my own decision-making on a day-to-day basis. I haven't always lived that way. I've lived very incoherently as well and forgotten. However, using this trifecta system on myself has also brought me back to a place of remembering and back to a place of really thriving. And so now at this point in time, I'm creating a container that's going to be running at the beginning of February for 3 months to go on a journey, 12-week journey through the trifecta system of healing and rebalancing the core wound so that you don't have distraction. You can get a very clear vision of your ideal reality, hook into that, start the migration process towards that in the physical, and very naturally and effortlessly, easily attract the prosperity you need and the people you need to support that vision coming into play. It's really that simple. The techniques I use definitely come from the Trifecta astrology, human design, Gene Keys, I Ching system, plus a lot of the other multidimensional work that I've been doing over the last 20 years. I'll go into that in more detail. It's quite quantum and tricky to describe in a couple sentences. Plus just being supportive human beings. And of course, using some sound and frequency to accelerate the whole process. So if you're interested in knowing more about this or joining this program potentially, there's a link in the description below where you can get a hold of me and we can have a chat and we can see if you're a good fit for it. It does begin in just under a month from now. So yeah, I've got a couple spaces left. Not too many, because I asked people last month before I really announced this publicly who I thought would be interested. People had worked with me before, and I got a big resounding yes from a lot of people. So there's a couple spots left. And if this is landing with you and this sounds good, please give me a call. Let's chat. Let's make it happen for you. Okay. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. And I will catch you next week. And I've got a very special guest coming on the show to have an excellent chat. Take care.